Years ago, if you're a San Diego Charger, now LA Charger, but back then San Diego Chargers had the second pick in the NFL draft. And they picked a guy who was very successful in the college ranks. He almost got a Heisman Trophy. His name was Ryan Leaf. Anyone remember Ryan Leaf? I mean, he was supposed to be the great quarterback that's going to rescue the San Diego Chargers from the misery they were in the losing season. And now they have this young, talented quarterback. And he was young and he was talented, but his head was so big. And he had so much money, and he just didn't relate to the players. He didn't listen to the coaches. He would yell in the locker room, even as a reporter would come and say, hey, you had a bad game, and he would just lose it. He got so bad, he was traded, and he's bounced around the NFL. Pretty soon, he wasn't even in the NFL. Pretty soon, he got in trouble with the law, spent some time in prison. You go, wow. Here's a guy that had a lot of success and a lot of possibilities for the future, and he just blew it. Just blew it. And I think today's lesson is for, as we look at the life of Gideon, is you got to finish well. I think Gideon, he won the war, but he lost the victory. The victory wasn't there. He didn't do it after the battle. He just lost what was going on. And so we're going to pick up the story as we go through the book of Judges and look at the good and the bad and the ugly and what's going on. So chapter 8 is where it all starts. And it just says, when he started to have this great victory, he took off and he called other soldiers to his side and said, let's go get the Midianites. There's still some left. And so he started to chase these Midianites out of Israel. And one of the tribes, the Ephraim tribes, they got together with Gideon and they're kind of upset, Hey, we have a big army. We have a good team of soldiers. Why didn't you call us? Why didn't you have us come and help you? Gideon replied, what have I accomplished compared to you? I mean, they're a great tribe. They have a lot of money. Ephraim was one of the wealthier tribes. And he says, what have I done compared to you? Aren't even the leftover grapes of Ephraim harvest better than the entire crop of my little clan? God gave you victory over Oreb and Zeb. So they already had this battle. They already kind of joined in, and they already killed a couple of leaders of the Midianites. And so one of the good things about Gideon, in the midst of the aftermath of victory, and we're going to look at a few good things, because there's some good in the midst of the bad, he was discerning. He said, you know what, let me calm you down. Let me talk to you. He had some discernment. And I think all of us in our days of success, we also need to be discerning. And how do we handle people's moods and tempers and attitudes and just kind of, coaches of teams, you have to work with all these different personalities. And coaches of some basketball teams, you have all these millionaires and you're trying to work with them. And it's tough. It's a tough job. Gideon had to do that. He was a little prejudiced because Ephraim, they were the rich tribe. The rich get favor because they have a lot of grapes and produce and money and soldiers. So he's working on the rich. Isn't that the way sometimes people who get in power, they say, I'm going to show a little favor to certain groups, especially those who perhaps are rich, and we'll see this later on. But discernment was good, so we'll give that to Gideon. Then going on, another thing was punishment. He was able to punish people that really didn't come to his aid. And as he's mopping up this victory, there's a few generals that are getting away from the Israelites, the Midianites. And so he crossed the Jordan, chasing the enemy, trying to kill them. He says, Gideon then crossed the Jordan River with his 300 men. Verse 4. And though exhausted, they continued to chase the enemy. When they reached Succoth, Gideon asked the leaders of the town, please give my warriors some food. Now, this was a town on the east side of the Jordan River, but it was still part of Israel. They were still part of the Israelite group. So what did they do? Nothing. It was almost like, betraying their own country. He went out and captured these two soldiers, killed everyone else, and then he came back, and it says this, Gideon took the elders of the town and taught them a lesson, punishing them with thorns and briars from the wilderness. He also tore down the tower of Peniel and killed all the men in the town. These two towns that were acting not supportive and almost treacherous to him and being a traitor to their country, he came back and punished them. And they did deserve some form of punishment. Might have been a little extreme, but we'll give that to him. Then justice. Back then in those days, and according to the law of Moses, if someone killed somebody, then you as family members actually had to go and do the investigation and find out who killed whoever was a loved one or someone, and then you bring them to justice, and you did have a right to bring justice to the guilty party. And so Gideon had all of his brothers killed by the Midianites. We know that as we read this, they went and caught some people, and it says that he caught them and he was looking at them, and he in verse 18, Gideon asked these two leaders, he said, "The men you killed at Tabor," that was a mountain back in Israel when the Midianites were in control and everything was all right. He goes, "The men you killed, what did they look like?" They said, "Like you." He goes, "Those are my brothers." It says that in verse 9. Those were my brothers. You went out, and we don't know the story behind it, but it just says these leaders killed Gideon's brothers. And Gideon went out and found them and brought them back and said, you deserve the death penalty. And so he brought them there. And again, back in the Old Testament time, how you died was a story that people told, and it affected your family and relatives. Well, here Gideon wanted to humiliate not only his guys, bring them to death, but he also wanted to humiliate the Midianites and the families and stories on it. So he said, "I'm going to have my son kill you," which is it's worse than having a woman. It's like a son, a little boy killing you. So he gave the sword to his son. And these guys are looking, and you kind of read behind the lines or in between the lines. It's like, I don't want to be killed by that's humiliating. Plus, this little boy barely can hold a sword. And if he's going to kill us, he's not going to kill us quickly. He's going to miss there, and they're going, I don't want to die by the hands of a boy. And so they looked at Gideon, and they said in verse 1, "Be a man, kill us yourself." And the little boy actually didn't want to do that. He said, "Dad, I can't. Gideon, what are you doing, having your little boy kill the two?" And the men looked and said, "Hey, kill us yourself." So Gideon picked up the sword and killed them both. So justice was served. All right, we'll give you that. And then humility. The good, as we see in Gideon, as the victory now is total. It's complete. 135,000 men completely wiped out. Israel has a tremendous victory. Gideon led these men, inspired by the Lord, given victory by the Lord, but he's also showing a little humility before it all crashed down. But it looks this way in 23, or 22 we'll go back to, and says, "Then the Israelites said to Gideon, 'Be our ruler, be our judge, be our ruler. You and your son and your grandsons will be our rulers. You have rescued us from Midian. Thank you so much.'" And here's his humility. A little false humility sometimes. You ever like when people, say, I don't deserve it, but go ahead, give me all the praise and money and attention. It's a false humility. This is what he said. "I won't rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over you." That's great. He should have stopped talking, because he said, no, the Lord's going to rule over you. But then you see verse 24, that little word, however. How many howevers do we have in our lives? We say the right thing, you should just stop. Stop talking. Back then, as a king, you had certain rights, certain privileges, certain things. And back in Deuteronomy, and we had this discussion on Tuesday about kings. Why didn't Israel have a king? Well, God wanted to be a king, but God said in Deuteronomy, "I'll choose your king if you ever have a king. I will choose it. And here's some of the things that I want a king to have." But you might say, let's appoint a king over us, as all our neighboring nations have done. And you can indeed appoint you a king that your Lord, your God, selects. And then the rest of the chapter just gives over these requirements. When it's time, God will choose a king, not before. But here's a couple things. He has to be an Israelite. Can't get another king that's not an Israelite. But must not acquire many horses. Must not take many wives. Back then, as a king, you just sealed a peace treaty with the daughters and the marriage of many nations. And so you acquired many wives. And God said, no, you shouldn't do that. You must not accumulate a large amount of money. And then it also says you must keep a copy of God's Torah with him to be read throughout his life. So they had some guidelines. And right away, the pride of Gideon, the bad started. And he says, I have one request, that each of you give me an earring from the plunder you've collected from your fallen enemies. Give me an earring. Every Midianite had an earring in his ear, or both of them. So they gave him at least one. That was a lot of gold. 132,000 pieces of gold. That was huge. A little price. Says, you know what? I think I do deserve a little money. We don't see Gideon ever asking God and praying and asking God for direction and God for advice. You don't read that he prayed and asked God for wisdom. He was craving recognition. He couldn't handle correction. He was constantly needed to be affirmed, and he failed to consult other people. Pride certainly is what happens before you fall. The writer of Proverbs, Solomon, said this: pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before the end. It's just, watch out when you're successful. Pretty soon you think you're all that. Pretty soon you think you're the wisest person around. Pretty soon you think you deserve the recognition, you deserve the money, you deserve a whole lot. And that got to Gideon's head, and he struggled with pride. Just guard yourself against pride. Whenever you feel slighted, whenever you feel like people aren't paying attention to you, got that little voice in your body saying, hey, you deserve more. It's pride just getting to you. Pride is the downfall of many. And they're doing so well, and then they trip over that little thing called pride, and it soon turns into a monster. Satan struggled with it as an angel and wanted to be like God. Then he soon got kicked out of heaven. Adam and Eve was looking at that fruit. Hey, if you take this, you'll be like God. Pride is just something that gets to us, and you got to guard yourself against that. Prosperity is another thing. Nothing wrong with being rich. Nothing wrong with being wealthy. God, if he has blessed you with wealth, great. But don't let it get to your head as pride would. All of a sudden, he collected all these gold earrings, and it was 43 pounds. Not including the royal ornaments and pendants, that the purple clothing worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains around the necks of the camels. And it had a lot of camels, thousands of camels, and he had all this gold. He's acting like a king. Sometimes you see people that are successful and they have a lot of money, and then they start to have material excess. You go, why do you need a jet for your own transportation? Why do you need 7 cars? Why do you need a TV in the bathroom? I don't understand that. And you start hearing all these things of the wealthy, and you go, why do you need all that? And sometimes, even in our lives, if God has blessed you, just watch the pride and watch what prosperity does. Just beware of it, because sometimes it just erodes your dependence on God. Because when you're down and out like Gideon was, you just prayed to God for deliverance. But now that he's wealthy and prosperous and everyone's paying attention to him, does he need God? No. His popularity was rising. Gideon, the great warrior who got all of us free from the Midianites, let's give him money. And he has all this wealth and also popularity. It said Gideon made a sacred ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. This was something that priests would wear. It's kind of a vest. Had these special stones on his plate, and it was something that the priests would wear to put themselves in a very special place. In the Old Testament, people had to go to a priest who would then pray to God on their behalf. When Jesus died on the cross, he said, you don't need priests. You don't need someone in the middle. You can go directly to God. And he says, all who believe in Jesus become part of the priesthood of God, the family of God. But Gideon made himself, and he wasn't a priest, but he made himself this priestly garment, And then it put it in his hometown. And then people started to go to Gideon for advice. And Gideon became the mediator between God and man. It's kind of like if you're at a wedding, you know, and the bride is coming down the center aisle, and there's the groom just beaming, you know. I was just at a wedding, you know. Everyone looks at the bride, and then they look at the groom to see if he's crying. You know, it's like, here comes the bride. Is he crying? Is he crying? You know, you just got to see, and is his face smiling? How's the groom look? But at a wedding, if you can imagine, you know, the groom, but then there's this, you know, groomsman off to the side going, you know, and calling attention to himself, you know, and just people are looking, what's the groomsman doing? What is he doing? Have you ever been in a wedding that? I haven't. I mean, people go, what are you doing? But in a way, this is what Gideon's doing. They're supposed to look to God, who in a way is the groom. But Gideon's going over here and he goes, hey man, I'm popular, and look at me, I won a great victory, and pay attention. And people are going to Gideon. And it's just falling apart. He's now someone that everyone is going through. And the sad thing, Gideon, as great as he is the first judge that was alive when the nation of Israel started to slip away from God. Gideon, son of Joash, returned home. He had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. You remember what Deuteronomy said? If you got to get a king, he shouldn't have many wives. What does it say about Gideon? He had many wives. He also had a concubine in Shechem, who gave birth to a son whom he named Abimelech. And Abimelech is amazing because that name means, my father is king. So he named a son, which meant, my daddy's the king. Shechem, by the way, is where Joshua gave this big speech to all of the Israelites. As he's nearing his death, he said, you need to worship the God alone. Worship none of these gods around the Canaanites. Worship God. Me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And they said, we will serve the Lord too. Shechem was a special place in the history of the Israelites. And then that's where Abimelech came from. And very quickly, Abimelech was just terrible. Selfish ambition. I mean, when you're successful, watch out how ambitious you get if it's just selfish. Abimelech said, you know what? I want to be king. My name means my dad's a king. Now my dad's dead. I want to be king. I have 70 half-brothers. But you know what? I should be king myself. So he went to the citizens of Shechem and said, hey, do you want to be ruled by all 70 of Gideon's sons or by one man? And remember, I'm your own flesh and blood. I'm from the town of Shechem. And they go, yeah, you know what? You should be our king. Go ahead, be our king. We're going to choose you. And so they gave him money, and it shows that this town of Shechem had already drifted away because they had a temple to Baal. Baal, again, was this false god made of stone that they had sometimes would sacrifice little babies to so they could have a greater crop in the spring. And you go from selfish ambition and then idolatry and then you have murder. Abimelech was just a cold-blooded murderer. He just killed all 70 of his half-brothers. He said, I want to be king, but none of them should live. And so he went and killed them all, except one. The youngest one got away. Just from bad to worse, it's just a terrible time. He killed everybody, and then he went and set up his little kingdom in Shechem. And then later on, they fell away from that, and you have this mass murder. Shechem rebelled against Abimelech's leadership. And there's an interesting verse in Judges chapter 9. I don't have it up on the board, but if you have your Bibles, you look at this. God's watching. And he sees Abimelech killing all these people. Nothing's happening. No punishment. The people of Shechem, they like Abimelech. But God always is in control. And you see in verse 23, it says, God sent a spirit. Depends what version you have, a spirit or an evil spirit, to stir up trouble between Abimelech and the leading citizens of Shechem. God is in charge of everything. He's sovereign. He tells Satan, hey, Satan, you can't touch Job, but you can touch his family and his wealth. And okay, now you can touch Job, but you can't kill him. And so Job was sick. But Satan had to get permission from God. And here, as God is seeing what's going on in the town of Shechem and Abimelech, he goes, hey, Spirit, go stir up trouble. And they have to listen to God. And so he stirs up all this trouble, and pretty soon the citizens are against Abimelech, and Abimelech's now trying to corral this rebellion. And the story goes on that there was this trap and a deceptive battle plan. Eventually, Shechem wants to get rid of Abimelech, and Abimelech finds it out, so he kills all of the people in Shechem. All of them. Later on, Samuel says, so God was able to punish the people of Shechem when they appointed Abimelech as their king. Years later, they were punished. And then as Abimelech's trying to put down this rebellion that spread to another city, and there, these people again are in the tower, and he's going to burn them, but some lady has a millstone that she used to just get flour. She didn't know what to do, and she's up on the top, and she sees the men putting all these thorn bushes around the tower, and she just grabs it and throws it down as a defensive maneuver. But ordained by God, this one millstone hits Abimelech on the head and crushes his skull. He's about to die, and goes, I don't want to die at the hand of a woman. He told someone to kill him. And then you look at the end of the chapter in verse 56 and says, in this way God punished Abimelech for the evil that he had done against his father by murdering his 7 brothers. God also punished the men of Shechem for all their evil. So the curse of Jotham, the son of Gideon, was fulfilled. What a terrible ending to a story that just had some great potential. Gideon, your success got to your head. Your legacy was ruined. And I think for all of us as we go through life, you will be successful. There will be joys. There will be just a tremendous amount of recognition for you. There might be some wealth, and you deserve it. But just remember a couple lessons from here. And you just got to say, what do I got to remember? Well, God's judgment is sometimes slow, but always sure. Be sure your sin will find you out. God's judgment is always sure. But guard your heart. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25, I believe it just says, guard your heart. From there come all of the wellspring of life. And where's your heart? Is it after wealth? Is it after popularity? Is it after power? Where's your heart? And God says, I want your heart to be dedicated to me. Everything else is secondary. Don't be like Gideon. He lost his first love. Let Jesus be king of your life always. Don't want to put something else king of your life. Don't let someone else be your king. And don't let success go to your head. Stay humble. Just stay humble. In your life, I think that is a value that all of us need. Say, I am going to stay humble. A few stories, and then we'll sing one more song and end. One is kind of sad. You might know this old hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. A great story. Horatio Stafford wrote it after his wife and 4 daughters were traveling to England, and the ship got struck by another ship, and within minutes it sank. His wife was picked up holding on to something floating, but she survived, but his 4 daughters perished. And so he got on another ship later on, and as he said, Captain, show me where my daughter's ship went down. And he saw that and penned this great poem, It Is Well With My Soul. We sing it for encouragement. As he suffered such tragic time, he said, it's still well with my soul. I'm trusting in God. But he didn't end well. If you know the story of Mr. Stafford, he just did not end well. He started a cult that just was against all that he stood for. He eventually went to Jerusalem, and they had this weird beliefs and procedures, and it was just a different way to believe. It was just a cultic following. And he just went a little crazy. And he just had a sad ending to his life. And it wasn't so well with his soul. He didn't end well. A great song. And at the moment, and when you sing it, you go, these are great words. But later on in his life, he just lost focus on God. And he could have written a song at the end of his life that said, it is not well with my soul. He lost his trust in God. His faith in God, it just kind of drifted, and you go, what happened? Sometimes in tragic times, you just don't stay focused on God, and perhaps he focused on what God took from him, and it just left him empty. Humility is saying, God, you've given and you take away. I'm just a slave of yours. I'm here for your glory. I'm wanting to serve you. And stay focused on that. A better story is D.L. Moody, a great evangelist in the late 1800s. There's a Moody Church, Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. But he was so well known. He was the Billy Graham of his day, and people came and wanted to hear him. There were a group of pastors that came and leaders from Europe and wanted to hear Dwight Moody give a seminar, and they came to his school, and as they got in the school there, as tradition in Europe, they took their shoes off and left them by the door because they knew that their servants or someone in this building would take their shoes and shine them. Well, that's what happened in Europe, but that's not what happened in Chicago. And Moody, who had traveled all over the world, in Europe and America, had done these conferences. He's walking through the hallway one day, and he sees all the shoes out there, and he knew why they were out there. He goes, these are Europeans. They're expecting someone to shine their shoes. No one's going to shine their shoes. So he went and picked them all up. And the reason we know the story, and back in his room, he was cleaning all the shoes of the dust and shining them all up, and someone just came in and said, what are you doing? And he told him. He said, but don't tell anybody. He said, I won't. He lied, because we know the story. But Moody went back and put all those shoes back because that's what he expected. That's a humble man. D.L. Moody saying, I'll shine their shoes. He could have said, I got to get someone to shine their shoes, or I'm not going to shine the shoes. But the humility of D.L. Moody was honored by God. I think the final lesson is just be humble in all that you do. Don't let pride get to your head. If you have finances and prosperity, don't let that get to your head. If you have popularity, don't let that get to your head. Stay humble, worship God, and honor Him. Let's pray.